The chandeliers of the Crystal Renaissance Hotel sparkled like frozen stars, casting golden light across a ballroom filled with silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. This was the night New York's elite had been waiting for, the luxury charity gala. Laughter rang out, champagne glasses clinked, and every eye was turned toward the evening's host, Andrew Weston, the billionaire everyone envied. At his side was a breathtaking young model in a crimson gown, her arm wrapped tightly around his. But the whispers were sharper than the violins playing in the corner. Everyone knew Andrew was still married. His wife, Emma Weston, was nowhere to be seen. He smirked, savoring the scandal he created by flaunting his mistress in public, daring society to judge him. "Scarlett looks more like a queen than my wife ever did," Andrew joked to a cluster of investors, drawing cruel chuckles. For him, humiliation was sport. Suddenly, the grand doors at the far end of the ballroom opened. A hush spread like wildfire. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. In the silence, heels clicked steadily against marble. And there she was, Emma Weston, 6 months pregnant. Her hand rested on her rounded belly, her other gripping a clutch that gleamed under the chandeliers. She wore a midnight blue gown that draped over her figure with quiet elegance, her hair swept into a simple chignon. She didn't need diamonds. The very fact that she had come, alone, radiant and unbroken, was the most shocking jewel of the night. Andrew's smile faltered. His mistress stiffened, sensing the shift in the room. Emma paused at the top of the steps, her eyes sweeping over the crowd before settling on her husband, their gazes locked across the ballroom. For a man who built an empire on confidence, Andrew suddenly looked very small. The orchestra kept playing, but the gala had changed. Guests leaned toward each other, whispering behind jeweled hands. Some looked with pity, others with awe. Cameras began to flash. Emma took a breath, her heart pounding, her baby kicking as if urging her forward. She descended the steps slowly, deliberately, every step a declaration. Andrew Weston had spent months hiding her. But tonight, under the brightest lights, Emma had arrived, and she was about to change everything. Before the chandeliers, before the whispers of scandal, Emma Weston had been just a woman who believed in fairy tales. She grew up in a modest home in Pennsylvania, the eldest daughter of a schoolteacher and a nurse. Life was simple but filled with love. Emma had dreamed of becoming an architect, sketching houses on scraps of paper, imagining a future where she would build not only structures, but also a family rooted in trust. That dream seemed to come true the day she met Andrew Weston. He was 8 years older, already a rising star on Wall Street. Their meeting was almost cinematic, a charity art auction where she was volunteering. Andrew swept in with tailored confidence, bidding extravagantly on a painting Emma had admired. By the end of the night, he was bidding for her attention too. He wooed her with the charm of a man who always got what he wanted. Flowers appeared at her office, handwritten notes at her door, whispered promises of a future filled with luxury. And for a while, it was beautiful. Their wedding was the kind of spectacle splashed across glossy magazines. Emma in lace and pearls, Andrew in a tuxedo that gleamed under camera flashes. Their penthouse overlooked Central Park, a glass palace where Emma thought her happily ever after had begun. Friends envied her, strangers admired her. She was no longer Emma from Pennsylvania. She was Mrs. Andrew Weston, wife to a man who graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune. But what the world didn't see was how quickly love can rot when pride and vanity take its place. Andrew grew embarrassed of her modest roots. He corrected her at dinner parties when she used simple words, rolled his eyes when she wore the same gown twice, and eventually stopped inviting her to events altogether. "You don't fit the image anymore," he once snapped when she asked why she wasn't on the guest list for a gala. Emma's heart cracked the first time. But it shattered completely the night she found out she was pregnant. She had expected Andrew to lift her in joy, to talk about nurseries and names. Instead, his face hardened. "We'll keep this quiet," he said coldly. "Pregnancy doesn't play well with investors. It makes you look fragile. Fragile." That was the word he used to erase her. For 6 months, Emma lived in shadows. Andrew went to galas, posed with models, smiled for cameras. She stayed home, cradling her growing belly, decorating a nursery alone. The magazines speculated about Andrew's new love, and Emma was reduced to whispers and pity. Her only companions were the soft thumps of her unborn child and the ache of betrayal. Nights were the worst. She would scroll through social media, seeing Andrew in tuxedos beside women draped in diamonds, while she sat in pajamas with swollen ankles, wondering how love had turned into humiliation. Yet inside the pain, a fire sparked. Emma remembered the girl who sketched houses, who believed she could build her own future. She pressed a hand against her belly and whispered, "We're not weak. We won't stay hidden." So when the invitation to the luxury charity gala arrived, a card embossed with gold, Andrew's name on the header, Emma made a choice. She would not be erased. She would not let her child grow up in the shadow of shame. She found a gown, simple yet commanding, and prepared to walk back into the world Andrew had stolen from her. And now, here she was, standing beneath the chandeliers, the girl from Pennsylvania reborn. No longer fragile, no longer hidden, ready to face the man who had betrayed her and the society that had watched in silence. Andrew Weston had mastered the art of appearances. To the world, he was the golden boy of Wall Street, sharp, polished, untouchable. But beneath the glittering surface lay a man consumed by vanity, and nothing fed that vanity more than flaunting the young model who had become his shadow, Tessa Val. Tessa was barely 23, with endless legs, painted lips, and a talent for laughter that was just loud enough to turn heads. She wore crimson silk like armor, the kind of dress that demanded attention, and Andrew reveled in every glance she drew. At gala after gala, she clung to his arm like an accessory more valuable than any Rolex. To him, she was proof that he was still desirable, still powerful, still young. The tragedy was not that Andrew had a mistress. It was that he paraded her around so openly, as if daring his wife to object. But Emma wasn't even given the chance. He never invited her. Not to the charity auctions, not to the private yacht parties, not even to the holiday galas she once helped organize. "You'll just slow me down," he'd told her when she begged to attend one. "Investors don't want to see a swollen belly. They want glamour. They want fire." Those words branded Emma like a scar. She would sit alone in their penthouse, scrolling through headlines that screamed Andrew's name, watching photo after photo of him standing tall, Tessa pressed against his side. The press called Tessa his muse. Commentators whispered about his new beginning. Emma, his wife, the mother of his unborn child, was treated as if she didn't exist. The cruelty went deeper. Andrew didn't just hide Emma. He mocked her. At one private dinner with investors overheard by a journalist, Andrew had laughed. "My wife's too busy knitting baby clothes to understand real business." The comment made its way into gossip columns wrapped in humor, but Emma felt the sting. She had been the one who proofread his proposals, the one who kept his schedule when he was just starting out. She was the one who had believed in him before the world ever knew his name. And yet, he erased her with a single sneer. Tessa played her part perfectly. She wasn't shy about marking her territory. She posted filtered photos from Andrew's penthouse balcony, from the backseat of his car, even from his private jet. She knew exactly what she was doing, and so did Andrew. He encouraged it, grinning beside her in those snapshots, as if flaunting his betrayal was a badge of honor. What he didn't realize was that every post, every laugh, every cruel dismissal was fuel for Emma's quiet fire. She stayed silent not because she was weak, but because she was planning. Because sometimes the most powerful response isn't rage, it's patience. The night of the luxury charity gala was supposed to be Andrew's triumph. He intended to parade Tessa through the ballroom, toasting champagne, sealing deals, basking in the glow of admiration. He had bragged to colleagues just days before, "By the end of the night, Tessa will be the only woman anyone remembers." But destiny had other plans. As Andrew stood beneath the chandeliers, laughing too loudly, hands sliding possessively along Tessa's hip, he had no idea the doors were about to open. He had no idea that Emma, the wife he thought he had hidden forever, would step into the spotlight. And when she did, the foundations of his carefully constructed empire would begin to crack. Because for the first time in months, Emma wasn't just the woman he betrayed. She was the storm walking straight toward him. When the glittering world of galas and flashing cameras shut its doors to her, Emma Weston was left in silence. Their penthouse, once a symbol of triumph, became her prison. Glass walls offered views of Central Park, but they only reminded her how small and invisible she felt in a city that never noticed her absence. Days blurred into nights, and nights into mornings filled with loneliness. While Andrew basked in champagne-soaked laughter, Emma sat at home with swollen ankles, clutching a mug of lukewarm tea. She tried to distract herself with nursery plans, flipping through catalogs of cribs and mobiles, whispering lullabies to the baby growing inside her. She painted the walls soft blue with her own hands, imagining a haven of warmth where her child would be loved, even if his father had turned cold. But the silence was cruel. Each time Emma's phone buzzed with news alerts, she would see Andrew smiling beside Tessa. Headlines painted them as the city's it couple, their photographs splashed across gossip sites. Emma's name had vanished. In whispers she was referred to as the forgotten wife. Sometimes she overheard acquaintances pity her. Poor thing, left alone and pregnant, must be miserable. The words sliced through her pride. The humiliation cut deeper when she dared to confront Andrew. One evening she asked gently, "Why can't I be by your side?" He didn't even glance up from his glass of scotch. "Because you're not what people want to see," he said flatly. "Pregnancy is messy. It doesn't sell success." His cruelty was casual, almost bored. Emma retreated to the nursery that night, pressing her face into a tiny blanket she had folded. Tears soaked the fabric as she whispered apologies to her unborn child. "I'm sorry, little one. You deserve more than this." The pain wasn't just emotional, it was physical. Stress brought sharp cramps that frightened her. Alone, she clutched her belly, praying that her baby would stay safe despite the storm inside her. She wanted to call Andrew, but she knew the answer. He wouldn't come. His priority wasn't her health, but the glitter of his reputation. Loneliness grew heavier with each gala photo, each cruel whisper. Yet amid the sorrow, Emma's strength began to form. She read stories of women who rebuilt their lives after betrayal, who turned pain into power. She began journaling, filling pages with raw confessions. "I am not weak. I am not invisible. I am not disposable." Still, the world didn't stop reminding her of her humiliation. Delivery drivers smirked when they recognized her name. Former friends avoided her at brunches, afraid to take sides. And yet, she endured it all in silence, protecting her child with every ounce of resilience she had left. Emma's quiet nights became rehearsals for courage. She stood before the mirror, practicing the look she would wear if ever she faced Andrew in public again. Calm, steady, unbroken. She whispered promises to herself. "You will not cry in front of him. You will not bow your head." The silence of her penthouse no longer felt like defeat. It became a forge, shaping her pain into armor. For every tear she shed, she grew a little stronger. For every insult whispered behind her back, she stood a little taller. And when the gold-embossed invitation to the luxury charity gala arrived, Emma understood. This was not just an event. It was her moment. The world that had forgotten her was about to remember her name. The gold-embossed invitation sat on Emma's marble countertop like a challenge. The luxury charity gala, hosted by Andrew Weston himself, promised an evening of glamour and power. For weeks she had been invisible, erased by her husband's arrogance and the city's whispers. But that card glowed like a doorway, daring her to step out of the shadows. At first, Emma hesitated. Every memory of humiliation clawed at her heart. She pictured Andrew's smirk, Tessa's smug laughter, the eyes of strangers dissecting her every flaw. Fear pressed against her chest, whispering that she should stay home, safe in her cocoon of silence. But then she felt the kick of her baby, sharp, insistent, like a reminder that she wasn't just living for herself anymore. Her reflection in the mirror told the story of a woman who had been broken, yes, but not destroyed. The softness of pregnancy framed her face with new strength. The faint shadows under her eyes weren't signs of weakness. They were battle scars of survival. For the first time, Emma saw not the forgotten wife, but the woman who could rewrite her own narrative. She began to prepare with purpose. No more tears, no more hiding. She visited a boutique recommended by a friend and found the gown that spoke to her soul. Midnight blue satin that flowed like liquid courage, elegant yet commanding. The seamstress adjusted it carefully around her growing belly, whispering, "You look like a queen." For the first time in months, Emma believed it. Her transformation wasn't just about the dress. She scheduled a prenatal massage, took time to care for her swollen feet, and styled her hair into a classic chignon that framed her determined face. Each step of preparation felt like shedding another layer of shame. Emma rehearsed her entrance. She imagined walking into the ballroom, head high, unflinching. She practiced her breathing, steady and calm, so her baby would feel her courage instead of her fear. At night, she whispered to her unborn child, "We are stronger than his betrayal. We will not be hidden." The turning point came when she opened a drawer and found the photo of her wedding day. There she was, smiling beside Andrew, naive and hopeful. For a moment, sorrow threatened to drown her, but then she ripped the photo in half, her hands steady. That chapter was over. She would not walk into the gala as Andrew's discarded wife. She would walk in as Emma Weston, the woman who refused to disappear. The night of the gala, as her car pulled up to the glittering entrance of the Crystal Renaissance Hotel, Emma's heart pounded. She could hear the music drifting through the doors, see the cameras flashing in a storm of light. She gripped her clutch, rested a protective hand on her belly, and drew a deep breath. This was her stand, not for revenge alone, but for dignity, for her child, for every piece of herself that Andrew had tried to erase. She wasn't just attending a gala, she was reclaiming her voice. And when those grand doors opened, Emma knew the world would see her not as a victim, but as the storm Andrew never saw coming. The morning of the gala, Emma awoke with nerves tangled in her stomach, almost as restless as the child shifting gently inside her. For weeks she had lived in silence, but today would be different. Today she would prepare not as the abandoned wife, but as a woman stepping back into the world with unshakable dignity. Her first step was self-care. She booked a prenatal massage at a quiet spa overlooking the Hudson River. The therapist worked carefully, easing the tension from her shoulders, massaging away months of sleepless nights. Emma closed her eyes, imagining herself walking through the gala doors, her head high, her baby safe inside her. "You're carrying more than just life," the therapist murmured. "You're carrying strength." Those words settled deep in Emma's heart. Next came the dress. She returned to the boutique, where the midnight blue satin gown awaited her. As she slipped into it, the fabric draped over her body like liquid courage. The seamstress adjusted the seams gently around her belly, stepping back to admire her work. "You look powerful," she whispered. Emma caught her reflection in the mirror, and for the first time in months, she agreed. The gown didn't hide her pregnancy. It honored it, turning what Andrew saw as weakness into undeniable grace. She paired the gown with modest heels, a necessity for her balance, and a diamond bracelet that had been her mother's. It wasn't flashy, but it carried a history of resilience. Her mother had once told her, "Every woman has a moment where she must decide if she will bow or rise. Always rise." Tonight, Emma would rise. Hair and makeup followed. Her stylist swept her hair into a chignon, classic and understated, with a few tendrils left loose to frame her face. Her makeup was elegant, enhancing her natural beauty without drowning it in pretense. A touch of red lipstick was the final stroke, bold enough to say she would not be silenced. But the true makeover was internal. As Emma stood before the mirror, she no longer saw the woman who cried alone in the nursery. She no longer saw the fragile wife erased by Andrew's vanity. She saw someone reborn, strong, radiant, unafraid. The baby's kick echoed that revelation as if to say, "Yes, Mama, we're ready." Her friend Lena arrived in the afternoon to help with final touches. When she saw Emma, her eyes widened. "You don't look like a woman going to face her cheating husband. You look like the woman who's about to own the room." Emma smiled softly. "That's the plan." The hours ticked by, and with every minute Emma's confidence grew. She rehearsed her entrance one last time, practicing her posture, her calm smile. She reminded herself that tonight wasn't just about confronting Andrew. It was about reclaiming the narrative he had stolen, proving that dignity shines brighter than scandal. As the sun dipped and the city lights flickered to life, her car arrived. Emma stood tall, clutch in hand, her gown flowing around her like midnight waves. She glanced once more in the mirror before leaving. "This is for us," she whispered to her unborn child. "Tonight, we rise." When the door closed behind her and the city's hum embraced her, Emma knew there was no turning back. The makeover was complete, not just of her appearance, but of her spirit. And soon, Under the brightest chandeliers, the world would see her transformation. The grand doors of the Crystal Renaissance Hotel swung open with a resonant echo, as though the building itself sensed something monumental was about to unfold. The music from the orchestra swelled, violins shimmering through the air, but for a split second, it felt as though time had stopped. All eyes shifted toward the entrance. Emma Weston stepped forward. Her midnight blue gown shimmered under the chandeliers, catching every flicker of light as if the stars themselves had chosen to follow her. Her hand rested protectively over the gentle curve of her belly, the other gripping her clutch with unshakable poise. She did not hurry. Each step down the marble staircase was deliberate, regal, sending ripples of silence across the ballroom. Gasps rose from the crowd. Some guests leaned into one another, whispering frantically, "Isn't that Andrew's wife? She's pregnant, my God. Why is she here?" The words swirled like smoke through the air, but Emma didn't falter. Her eyes remained locked forward, calm and unwavering. Andrew, standing near the bar with a glass of champagne in hand, froze. The confident smirk that had been plastered on his face all evening drained away as if the ground had opened beneath him. Beside him, Tessa Vale clutched his arm tighter, her smile stiffening into something brittle. She had expected Emma to be a ghost, banished from sight. Instead, here she was, radiant and impossible to ignore. The photographers reacted first. Flashbulbs exploded like fireworks, capturing Emma's every move. She became the instant center of gravity, pulling the entire room toward her. No longer the invisible wife, no longer erased, she was suddenly the headline, the story no one could look away from. Emma's heart pounded, but her face betrayed nothing. She descended the last step and paused, her eyes sweeping across the ballroom before finding Andrew. For the briefest moment, their gazes locked. His jaw tightened, his hand slipping slightly from Tessa's waist. He had built an empire on control, but in that instant he looked small, cornered, exposed. Tessa, ever the performer, forced a laugh and whispered something in Andrew's ear, but it rang hollow. Her crimson gown, once the loudest flame in the room, suddenly seemed garish against Emma's quiet strength. Guests noticed, investors noticed, and Andrew knew it. Emma did not approach him right away. Instead, she turned to a group of board members nearby, men and women who had once seen her as a background figure. She greeted them warmly, her voice steady, her smile confident. The whispers grew louder. They had expected scandal, but what they saw was composure, grace, strength. The orchestra played on, but the energy of the gala had shifted completely. Where once Andrew had commanded attention, now he was a shadow. Emma had taken the stage without uttering a single word. As she moved through the crowd, heads turned, conversations hushed, every detail, the elegance of her gown, the subtle glow of her pregnancy, the steel in her eyes, told the world one undeniable truth. Emma Weston was no longer hiding. She was here to reclaim her place, not as Andrew's accessory, but as a force of her own. Andrew's champagne glass trembled slightly in his hand. He forced a smile, but the mask was cracking, and deep inside he knew. The storm he had mocked, the wife he had dismissed, had just walked through those doors. And she wasn't leaving quietly. The Crystal Renaissance Ballroom had hosted royalty, tycoons, and dignitaries, but never had it witnessed a silence so thick, so electric, as when Emma Weston crossed the floor. The air buzzed with tension, the whispers of 100 powerful voices colliding in disbelief. At one table, a socialite gasped, clutching her pearls. "She's pregnant, and Andrew never brought her to a single gala." Another leaned closer, lowering her voice but not her excitement. "Look at her. She's glowing. That mistress doesn't stand a chance tonight." Phones began to rise discreetly, screens glowing as guests texted furiously. "Emma's here. Pregnant. You won't believe this." The city's rumor mill spun into overdrive before dessert had even been served. Andrew felt the weight of 100 eyes drilling into him. Just minutes earlier, he had been the life of the party, laughing too loudly, basking in admiration. Now he was a man trapped under the spotlight of shame. His grip on Tessa's arm tightened until she winced. He leaned toward her, whispering harshly, "Smile. Don't let them see weakness." Tessa obeyed, but her smile looked painted on, brittle at the edges. She could feel the room shifting, power sliding away from her like sand through her fingers. She had spent months rehearsing this role, Andrew's dazzling new partner, the proof of his superiority. But all it took was Emma, pregnant, radiant, unshaken, to unravel it. Emma, meanwhile, played her part with effortless grace. She didn't march straight to Andrew or create a scene. Instead, she let the crowd's fascination work in her favor. She greeted guests she hadn't seen in years, shaking hands, sharing polite laughter. She moved through the ballroom like a queen acknowledging her court, forcing everyone to recognize her presence. Every smile, every conversation was a dagger to Andrew. Investors he had courted with false charm were suddenly turning their eyes toward Emma, measuring her strength, wondering what else Andrew had hidden. One whispered to another, "If he hides his wife, what else does he hide in business?" The seed of doubt was planted. Andrew finally excused himself from a group, dragging Tessa along, and confronted Emma in a corner near the champagne tower. His voice was low but seething. "What are you doing here?" Emma met his glare with calm eyes. "I'm attending a gala." "Isn't that what wives do?" The nearby guests, pretending to sip their drinks, leaned in closer. Emma's poised tone contrasted sharply with Andrew's clenched jaw, and the social tide began to turn. Tessa shifted uncomfortably, feeling the sting of being invisible. For the first time, she was the one standing in the shadow. "Don't play games with me," Andrew hissed. "You're embarrassing me." Emma tilted her head, her voice still gentle. "No, Andrew, I think you did that yourself." The words landed like a slap. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Emma hadn't raised her voice, but everyone heard. Everyone understood. Tessa tried to recover, looping her arm through Andrew's. "Darling, maybe we should go." But Andrew couldn't move. His empire was built on perception, and perception was slipping from his grasp. To leave now would be to admit defeat. To stay meant enduring the whispers, the stares, the headlines already being written in real time. Emma simply stood there, radiant, untouchable, the woman he had tried to erase, but who now owned the room. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted. Not with fury, but with quiet, undeniable dignity. The tension in the ballroom was suffocating. Guests sipped champagne they no longer tasted, their eyes flicking between Andrew's clenched jaw and Emma's serene defiance. The whispers had turned into a low hum, like bees circling a hive ready to burst open. And then, through the crowd, came a figure who carried his own gravity. Ethan Blackwell. He was the kind of man who didn't need introduction. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a tailored black tuxedo, Ethan was the billionaire investors respected and rivals feared. He rarely attended public events, preferring to operate in the shadows where his influence stretched across industries. So when he appeared at Andrew's gala, every head turned. His presence alone could shift stock prices by morning. But it wasn't Andrew he approached. It was Emma. Crossing the ballroom with quiet authority, Ethan ignored the champagne flutes and outstretched hands of executives desperate for his attention. His eyes were fixed only on Emma, and when he reached her, he offered the smallest of smiles, warm and genuine. "Emma Weston," he said clearly, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by those lingering nearby. "It's been too long." Emma blinked, stunned. She remembered Ethan from years ago, back when Andrew was still clawing his way up the financial ladder. Ethan had been a distant acquaintance, a man she had spoken to briefly at dinners, always impressed by his calm intelligence. She hadn't expected him tonight, let alone standing by her side. Andrew's face drained of color. "Ethan," he stammered, forcing a grin, "what a surprise. I didn't know you were coming." Ethan turned his gaze to Andrew, cool and unblinking. "You didn't invite me." Then he looked back at Emma, his tone softening. "But I heard whispers of someone worth showing up for." The ballroom erupted with a collective intake of breath. It wasn't just the words, it was the weight behind them. By acknowledging Emma so publicly, Ethan had shifted the power dynamic in a single stroke. Tessa's grip on Andrew's arm faltered. She could feel it too, the balance tilting. The mistress in crimson was suddenly invisible next to the quiet glow of the woman Ethan Blackwell had chosen to stand beside. Emma, steady despite the whirlwind inside her, inclined her head politely. "It's good to see you again, Ethan." He extended his arm. "May I?" For a heartbeat, Emma hesitated. Then she placed her hand on his arm, her fingers resting lightly on the fine wool of his tuxedo. The gesture was simple, yet the symbolism was undeniable. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. Around them, conversations sparked like firecrackers. "Did you see that? Blackwell's with her. This changes everything." Andrew's composure cracked. His smile twitched, his jaw tight. He leaned toward Ethan, voice low but sharp. "What exactly are you doing?" Ethan's response was measured, almost casual, but laced with steel. "Acknowledging the woman who deserves respect, something you seem to have forgotten." It was a dagger delivered with elegance, and it cut Andrew deeper than any scandal could. Because in that moment, his guests, his investors, his so-called allies, all of them saw the truth. Andrew Weston had tried to erase his wife. Yet here she stood, radiant and dignified, and now shielded by one of the most powerful men in the room. Emma felt her baby shift inside her belly, as though echoing the strength flowing through her veins. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was rising. And with Ethan by her side, the night was only beginning. The tension in the Crystal Renaissance ballroom had reached a breaking point. Guests, who had once orbited Andrew Weston, now lingered on the edges, their curiosity magnetized by the sight of Emma standing beside Ethan Blackwell. The murmurs were relentless, fueled by the contrast between Andrew's forced grin and Emma's quiet strength. Andrew could feel the ground shifting beneath him. For years, he had controlled the narrative, bending perception to his will. Tonight, that control slipped through his fingers, and his instincts screamed for him to regain it. He stepped forward, dragging Tessa along, his voice pitched loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Well, isn't this touching?" he sneered, his eyes darting between Emma and Ethan. "My wife has finally decided to crawl out of hiding, and conveniently, she's found herself a new sponsor." His smirk widened, cruel and calculated. "Tell me, Emma, is that why you came tonight? To beg for someone else to carry you now that you're too heavy to stand on your own?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. The cruelty of his words was naked, vulgar. Tessa pressed closer to his side, but even she looked uneasy, as if Andrew had crossed a line she hadn't expected. Emma's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. Her hand rested protectively over her belly, her eyes steady on Andrew. "I didn't come here to beg," she said, her voice calm, carrying across the room like a bell. "I came here to remind you that I exist, that we exist." She glanced briefly at her rounded stomach, then back at Andrew, her gaze cutting sharper than glass. The ballroom fell silent. Andrew laughed too loudly, desperate to regain dominance. "Exist? Emma, you're nothing but a shadow of this world. You don't belong here, not anymore. These people." He swept his arm around the glittering guests. "They don't respect weakness. And that's all you've ever been." Before Emma could respond, Ethan stepped forward. His voice was measured, but it carried the weight of authority no one dared to ignore. "Careful, Andrew," he said, his tone calm but edged with steel. "Every man in this room knows that the measure of power isn't how loudly you boast, but how you treat the people closest to you." A murmur rose from the crowd. Andrew stiffened, his face flushing. "This is none of your business, Blackwell." Ethan's eyes didn't waver. "When you parade your mistress around like a trophy and belittle your pregnant wife in public, you make it everyone's business. And tonight, it seems the whole room is watching." The truth landed heavy. Cameras flashed, guests whispered, and Andrew's facade began to crumble. He had come to the gala expecting to dominate headlines with his charm and his mistress. Instead, he was being dismantled, piece by piece, in front of the very people whose approval he craved most. Emma felt a surge of gratitude toward Ethan, but more than that, she felt strength ignite inside herself. She no longer needed to hide. She no longer needed to bow her head. Andrew's words couldn't erase her dignity unless she allowed them to. And tonight, she refused. She lifted her chin, her voice steady. "Weakness isn't carrying life inside you, Andrew. Weakness is being so ashamed of the truth that you try to bury it." The crowd erupted, not with applause, but with the unmistakable hum of judgment shifting. For the first time, Andrew Weston looked cornered. And Emma Weston, the woman he had dismissed as fragile, stood in the center of the ballroom, unbroken. The confrontation had shaken the room, but Andrew Weston was not the kind of man to accept defeat, especially not in front of the very investors who fed his empire. His pride, bruised and bleeding, scrambled to reassert itself. He pasted on a smile that didn't reach his eyes, raised his glass, and clinked it against the champagne tower with a sharpness that cut through the whispers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his voice rising above the hum of conversation. "What you've just witnessed is unfortunate family drama. But let's not confuse personal matters with business. Tonight, we're here to celebrate progress, innovation, and the future. He gestured toward Tessa, pulling her close. And this beautiful woman, is part of that future. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. His attempt to pivot was transparent, but Andrew pressed on, desperate to regain control. My wife may be emotional, but emotions don't close billion-dollar deals. Logic, strategy, ambition, those are what drive success. And I assure you, I remain committed to delivering results that make all of you wealthier than you've ever been. Several investors exchanged glances. Some nodded, eager to protect their interests. Others frowned, uneasy with the spectacle they had just witnessed. Andrew spotted the doubt flickering and doubled down. He strode toward a cluster of board members, lowering his voice just enough to sound conspiratorial, but loud enough for others to overhear. Emma has always been fragile. Sweet, yes, but fragile. She doesn't understand this world. She never has. You all know me. You've seen me win. Don't let a dramatic entrance distract you from what really matters. His words spread like smoke through the ballroom. A few investors whispered back, testing his narrative. He has delivered profits, one murmured. Another, less convinced, replied, but humiliating your wife in public. What else does he hide? Andrew ignored the doubt, rallying whoever he could. He gestured toward Emma with dismissive theatrics. She wants sympathy. That's her game. But sympathy doesn't build empires. It doesn't protect your shares or grow your portfolios. Trust me, gentlemen, Andrew Weston is still the name that guarantees returns. Emma, standing a few feet away with Ethan at her side, heard every poisoned word. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with fury. For years, she had been the silent architect behind Andrew's polished proposals, the one who spotted flaws in contracts, the one who reminded him of risks he pretended he calculated alone. And now he dared to paint her as ignorant, as weak. Ethan leaned toward her, his voice low but steady. Let him talk. The more he speaks, the more he shows them who he really is. Emma nodded, though her hands trembled against her clutch. She knew Ethan was right. Still, it hurt to see Andrew twist reality with such ease, to watch him charm men who had once praised her at dinners and now averted their eyes as though she were an inconvenience. But the tide was not fully in Andrew's favor. As he boasted about his vision, more eyes began drifting back to Emma, the woman who had stood tall against humiliation, who carried life inside her while facing betrayal head-on. Her silence now carried more weight than his thunderous words. Andrew, however, mistook the murmurs for victory. He raised his glass again, grinning. To the future of Weston Holdings. The toast echoed hollowly, scattered applause breaking the tension but not mending it. Beneath the glittering chandeliers, fault lines deepened. Andrew believed he was tightening his grip on power. What he didn't realize was that his desperate rally had revealed something fatal. His fear. And fear, once exposed, was a crack no empire could survive. The champagne tower glittered, the orchestra played, but for Emma Weston, the ballroom suddenly felt like it was closing in on her. The weight of 100 eyes pressed against her, some filled with sympathy, others with doubt, and too many with judgment. Andrew's poisonous words still echoed in her ears. Fragile, emotional, irrelevant. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry. She had rehearsed this night over and over, picturing herself calm and unshaken. Yet beneath the satin of her midnight blue gown, her heart raced violently, and her legs trembled with the strain of standing tall. The baby shifted inside her, a reminder that she wasn't alone, but also a reminder of the fragility Andrew had weaponized. Emma excused herself from a small circle of guests, forcing a smile as she slipped toward the edge of the ballroom. She needed air. She needed space. The gilded doors opened into a quiet hallway lined with mirrors, the music muffled but the whispers still haunting her. She pressed a hand against her belly and leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. What am I doing? She thought. I don't belong here. Maybe Andrew is right. Maybe I should have stayed home. The tears she had fought so hard to hold back spilled at last, streaking her carefully applied makeup. She felt exposed, foolish, and unbearably tired. Months of silence, humiliation, and betrayal had led to this moment, and instead of triumph, she felt the crushing weight of it all. Images flooded her mind. Andrew laughing with Tessa, the gossip columns erasing her name, friends avoiding her calls. She remembered the nursery she had decorated alone, the nights she had cried into baby blankets, the loneliness, the shame, the endless silence. It all pressed down now, threatening to shatter her. For a fleeting moment, Emma considered leaving. She could slip out the side door, return to the safety of her penthouse, and pretend this night had never happened. She could raise her child quietly, far from the judgment of strangers and the cruelty of Andrew's tongue. Her knees buckled, and she caught herself against the mirror. "I can't do this," she whispered to her reflection. The woman staring back looked broken, fragile, exactly what Andrew wanted her to be. But then a voice interrupted the spiral. "Emma." She turned to see Ethan Blackwell standing in the doorway, his expression steady, unreadable, yet carrying a warmth she desperately needed. He walked toward her slowly, giving her space, his presence grounding the chaos swirling inside her. "You don't have to stay," Ethan said softly, "but if you walk out now, you give him exactly what he wants. And I know you're stronger than that." Emma shook her head, wiping at her tears. "I'm not strong. Look at me. I'm falling apart." Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "Falling apart isn't weakness. It's proof that you've carried more than anyone should. Strength isn't about never breaking. It's about standing back up when you do." His words pierced through the fog. Emma looked back at her reflection, her swollen eyes, her trembling body, and for the first time she didn't just see fragility. She saw survival. She had endured months of isolation, betrayal, humiliation, and yet she was still here, still standing. The baby kicked again, firm and insistent, as if reminding her, "We're in this together." Emma inhaled deeply, straightened her shoulders, and dabbed away the streaks of mascara. "You're right," she whispered. "I can't let him win." Ethan extended his hand not as a savior but as an anchor. Emma hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. The warmth of his grip steadied her trembling. The ballroom awaited, filled with whispers and judgment. But Emma Weston was no longer on the verge of breaking. She was about to rise again. When Emma re-entered the ballroom with Ethan by her side, the atmosphere shifted again. Her tears were gone, her posture tall, her steps steady. Though whispers trailed behind her like shadows, the woman who had nearly fled minutes before now looked unshakable. Andrew, however, had not cooled. He prowled the floor like a caged animal, desperate to claw back respect. The investors he had courted with charm now lingered at a cautious distance, watching his unraveling. Tessa clung to him, her crimson gown bright as fire but her face pale with unease. Andrew saw Emma return and forced a mocking laugh. "Back already? I thought the pressure might have been too much for you, Emma." Before she could respond, Ethan's voice cut clean through the room. "Actually, Andrew, it looks like the pressure is all yours." The crowd turned. Ethan stood calm, unhurried, a glass of water in hand instead of champagne. He was a man who never wasted words, and when he chose to speak, people listened. "You see," Ethan continued, his gaze sweeping across the glittering audience, "there are rumors in our circles. Rumors about Weston Holdings and how it secures its contracts. Tonight seems as good a time as any to address them." A hush blanketed the ballroom. Cameras tilted toward him, recording every syllable. Andrew's face stiffened. This is not the time or place. But Ethan pressed on, his tone cool. "Isn't it? Investors deserve transparency. Partners deserve honesty, and the public deserves accountability." He pulled a small leather folder from inside his jacket and laid it gently on the nearest table. The movement was casual, but its effect was seismic. "Inside this folder," Ethan said, "are documents tracing payments made to shell companies during the last bidding cycle for government contracts. Payments approved under Weston Holdings." The crowd stirred, restless. A few gasps rose from the front row. Andrew's mask cracked. "That's absurd. Lies and forgeries." Ethan raised a hand. "I don't deal in lies, Andrew. These documents have already been verified by independent auditors. They show millions siphoned into offshore accounts, money meant for public infrastructure, money that disappeared while your company posted record profits." The room erupted. Guests turned to one another, murmuring fiercely. Reporters scribbled notes. Cameras flashed. Emma's breath caught. She had suspected Andrew's shady dealings but never dared imagine the proof would surface here, tonight under the chandeliers. She looked at Ethan, gratitude and shock mingling in her chest. Andrew tried to laugh, but the sound was hollow. "This is slander. a pathetic attempt to undermine me. Ethan's gaze didn't falter. It's not slander when the evidence is in black and white. Shall I read some of the names tied to the accounts? Or will you admit it here, in front of your investors, before they read it on the front page tomorrow? A deadly silence followed. Even Tessa shifted uneasily, pulling her arm from Andrew's grasp. She whispered, "Andrew, is this true?" His glare at her was venomous, but the damage was done. Doubt had seeped into every corner of the room. Investors who had once toasted him now stared with suspicion. Some already tapped messages into their phones, likely to their legal teams. Emma placed her hand on her belly, steadying herself. For months she had been humiliated, erased, treated as invisible. But now the truth was out. The empire Andrew had built on lies and betrayal was crumbling, and she was here to witness it. Andrew opened his mouth, but no words came. And in the silence, Ethan closed the folder and said, "The truth has a way of walking through the door, Andrew. Just like Emma did tonight." The ballroom quivered with whispers. Ethan's revelation had cracked Andrew's image wide open, but the room still buzzed with unanswered questions. Every eye turned between the billionaire with the folder of damning evidence and the pregnant wife who had returned from shadows to claim her place. Emma could feel her heartbeat pounding in her throat. For months she had been silent, enduring humiliation alone. Tonight she had planned only to show the world she still existed. But now, with Andrew exposed and the spotlight burning hotter, she understood something deeper. This was her chance to finally speak. She felt her baby kick, sharp and insistent, as if urging her forward. Emma straightened, her hand resting firmly over her belly. She took a step toward the center of the ballroom. The crowd parted instinctively, giving her space. Andrew's face tightened, fury and fear colliding. "Emma, don't," he hissed, his voice low but cutting. "Don't you dare embarrass me further." Her reply was calm, almost gentle. "The only one embarrassed tonight is you." Gasps scattered through the crowd. Emma turned slowly, making sure to meet the eyes of the guests who had whispered about her, pitied her, erased her. Her voice was steady, carrying across the room with the clarity of a confession long overdue. "For months you've seen pictures of Andrew with another woman. You've heard rumors. You've wondered why his wife never appeared by his side. Let me answer that for you." She paused, inhaling deeply. "He hid me. He hid his pregnant wife because he thought carrying life made me fragile. He paraded his mistress because he thought she made him look powerful. And he erased me because he thought I made him look weak." The room erupted in murmurs. Emma pressed on, her voice unflinching. "I was there when Andrew built his empire. I proofread his proposals, caught the mistakes in contracts, reminded him of risks he ignored. I believed in him before anyone else did. And when I told him we were expecting a child, he didn't celebrate. He told me to stay hidden, to stay quiet, because a mother doesn't fit his image of success." She swallowed hard, emotions threatening to crack her voice, but she refused to falter. "I stayed silent for too long. I let him define me as weak, as invisible. But tonight, I choose to be seen, not for his sake, for mine, for my child's." The orchestra had stopped. Even the waiters froze mid-step, hanging on her every word. Emma turned to Andrew, her gaze sharp as glass. "You wanted the world to believe I was nothing, Andrew. But tonight they see the truth. The weakness isn't mine, it's yours. Because only a coward hides his wife and unborn child to protect his pride." The silence that followed was deafening. Andrew's face burned crimson, his fists clenched at his sides. Tessa edged away from him, unwilling to share the blast of his humiliation. And then, from somewhere in the crowd, applause began. A single pair of hands, then another, until the ballroom erupted with clapping. It wasn't polite, it was fierce, resounding, a wave of validation crashing over Emma. Tears pricked her eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from release. For the first time in months, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't fragile. She was strong, undeniable, unbroken. Emma Weston had found her voice, and nothing Andrew could say would silence it again. The applause still echoed in the ballroom, rolling like thunder against the chandeliers. Emma stood in its center, glowing in midnight satin, her hand resting over her belly as if drawing strength from the life inside her. For months, she had been invisible. Now, every eye was locked on her, waiting, hungry for the next words. Andrew's face twisted with rage. He raised his hands, shouting above the clamor. Stop clapping. Stop this nonsense. You don't know what you're applauding. You don't know her the way I do. But the guests didn't stop. If anything, the applause grew louder, defiant. It wasn't just support for Emma, it was a rejection of Andrew's arrogance. Emma lifted her chin, her voice slicing through the noise with quiet authority. No, Andrew, they don't know me the way you do. And that's the problem. The room hushed again. Emma let the silence build before she spoke. You all see Andrew Weston, the man in the tuxedo, the billionaire who smiles for cameras. But you don't see the husband who humiliated me behind closed doors, the man who laughed at my background, who called me fragile when I carried his child, the man who erased me from his life while parading his mistress like a prize. A sharp gasp echoed from the crowd. Emma's eyes flicked briefly to Tessa, who flushed scarlet and dropped her gaze to the floor. Emma continued, steady and strong. Do you want the truth? While you toasted Andrew at yacht parties, I sat alone, decorating a nursery. While he courted investors with lies, I fought tears every night, wondering why the man who promised to love me chose shame instead. And while he smiled for magazines with women on his arm, I carried his child, alone. The words cut deep. Even the orchestra players lowered their instruments, riveted by the storm unfolding. Andrew laughed bitterly, desperate to claw back control. Oh, please, don't act like a saint, Emma. You've always been needy, always demanding more than I could give. What you call betrayal, I call freedom. Emma's gaze hardened. Freedom? Is that what you call hiding your wife so you could flaunt another woman? Is that what you call stealing my work, my strategies, my insights, and passing them off as your own? The murmurs exploded. Investors turned to one another in shock. Andrew had boasted of his brilliance for years, but Emma's words planted a dangerous doubt. You think you built this empire alone? Emma pressed on, her voice rising with righteous fire. But it was me reading contracts at 2 a.m, me pointing out risks you ignored, me believing in you when no one else would. I was your partner, Andrew. And instead of respect, you gave me humiliation. Her voice broke, but not with weakness, with conviction. You wanted me silent. Tonight, I refuse. The ballroom erupted again, this time not with applause, but with a roar of voices, questions, judgments, anger. The carefully polished image of Andrew Weston was crumbling in real time. His eyes darted wildly, searching for allies, but even his closest investors stepped back, unwilling to be pulled down with him. Emma, however, stood unshaken. The woman who had once wept alone in the nursery now faced the glittering crowd with unbreakable dignity. And in that moment, the lies of her marriage were no longer secrets whispered in the dark. They were truths shouted under the chandeliers, truths Andrew could never bury again. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, but the brilliance no longer belonged to Andrew Weston. His empire, once so carefully polished, was unraveling thread by thread before the very eyes of the people he had spent years manipulating. The applause for Emma had quieted, replaced by a heavy silence charged with judgment. Investors stood stiffly, arms crossed, expressions shifting from curiosity to suspicion. Andrew's carefully rehearsed smirk trembled on his lips, but his voice cracked as he tried to speak. None of this means anything, he stammered, waving his hand dismissively. She's just emotional, overwhelmed. You know how pregnancy affects women. It was a fatal mistake. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by sharp murmurs of disapproval. One woman in diamonds leaned toward her husband and whispered just loudly enough, "That's not leadership. It's cowardice." Ethan Blackwell, still at Emma's side, stepped forward. "Andrew," he said evenly, "you've spent years selling yourself as the face of control, discipline, brilliance. But tonight, your mask has cracked, and the people who trusted you can see the truth for themselves." Andrew spun to the investors nearest him, his desperation spilling over. "Don't listen to him. You've all made fortunes with me. You know I deliver results. This is nothing but a smear campaign." But doubt had already taken root. One board member, a man with silver hair and stern eyes, shook his head slowly. "I warned you last quarter about discrepancies in the financial reports. Now I wonder if you were hiding more than just your wife." Another added, "If he lies about his personal life, why wouldn't he lie about the books?" The whispers grew louder, sharper, cutting into Andrew like knives. He reached for Tessa, desperate for support, but she stepped back, slipping her hand from his grasp. Her crimson gown glimmered in the lights, but her expression was pale, conflicted. "Andrew," she whispered, "is any of it true?" The question echoed, and though her voice was soft, the ballroom heard it. Andrew's face twisted with rage. "Don't you dare question me too," he snapped. The crowd recoiled. Investors no longer saw a man in control, they saw a bully unraveling. Emma, standing steady despite the storm, watched as the cracks in Andrew's empire widened. She had imagined this moment in silence, dreamed of justice, but reality was far more raw. He wasn't just losing her, he was losing everything. A respected philanthropist who had once praised Andrew's vision now turned to Ethan. "If what you've shown us is true, we can't risk our reputations tied to him. We'll need to reconsider all partnerships." Andrew's eyes bulged, panic flooding his features. "No, you can't. You need me. I built this company." Ethan's voice was calm, merciless. "No, Andrew, you built an illusion, and illusions don't last under the weight of truth." Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed like lightning. The story of the night was no longer the gala, it was Andrew Weston's public collapse. Emma placed her hand gently over her belly, her heart steady for the first time in months. She wasn't the one drowning tonight, she wasn't the one begging for dignity. She had found her strength, and Andrew was finally facing the consequences of betraying it. His empire hadn't just cracked. It was collapsing, piece by piece, and the whole world was watching. The ballroom pulsed with the aftershocks of Andrew's collapse. Guests whispered in clusters, investors stepped aside to make frantic phone calls, and journalists scribbled notes that would become tomorrow's headlines. Yet in the center of the storm stood Emma Weston. Calm, radiant, her hand resting protectively over her belly. For months she had carried humiliation in silence, endured loneliness behind glass walls, and borne the sting of being erased. Tonight she had spoken her truth, and the world had heard it. But as the weight of the moment sank in, the tension she had carried for so long finally began to uncoil. Her knees trembled. The applause, the stares, the flashing cameras, it was all too much. She had braced herself to survive Andrew's cruelty, but she had never prepared for what victory would feel like. Her chest tightened and tears welled in her eyes. Not the bitter tears of sorrow that had soaked her pillows night after night, but tears that carried something new, something lighter. Ethan, standing close, noticed the shift. "Emma," he murmured, steadying her elbow. "Breathe. You don't have to hold it all in anymore." She nodded, but the tears spilled faster now, breaking past the dam she had built inside herself. She pressed a hand to her face, embarrassed, but Ethan gently shook his head. "Let them see. This isn't weakness. This is freedom." And so she let go. Her sobs were soft at first, almost silent, but they rippled with rawness. Her shoulders shook as months of silence poured out of her. Every insult, every lonely night, every cruel word Andrew had hurled at her. The crowd, which had once whispered against her, now watched with reverence. There was no pity in their eyes, only awe at a woman who had endured betrayal and stood taller for it. Emma's tears shimmered under the chandeliers, transforming the room. They weren't the tears of a broken woman. They were the tears of release, of a burden lifted. And with each one that fell, she felt lighter, freer. She thought of the nursery she had painted alone, the lullabies she had whispered through tears. She thought of the baby kicking inside her, a heartbeat of hope that had kept her alive when everything else felt lost. Tonight, that child wasn't growing in the shadows of shame. Tonight, they were standing together in the light. A woman from the board, a matriarch draped in emerald silk, stepped forward and touched Emma's shoulder. "My dear," she said softly, "don't be ashamed of those tears. They're the mark of strength. You've reminded us all what dignity looks like." Others nodded, murmuring agreement. The tide of judgment had turned completely. Emma was no longer the forgotten wife. She was the heroine of the night. Andrew, standing alone now with his fists clenched, looked smaller than ever. No words could drown out the image of his wife crying tears of triumph in front of the world. He had tried to break her, but her tears told everyone the truth. She was unbreakable. Emma wiped her face gently, her breath shuddering. She looked at Ethan, who gave her a reassuring nod, and then she smiled through the tears, a smile that was both fragile and fierce. "I thought crying made me weak," she whispered. "But it feels like freedom." The crowd erupted again, not with whispers but with applause that shook the chandeliers. This time, Emma didn't flinch. She let it wash over her, a tidal wave of validation, of release, of long-awaited justice. Her tears had turned from symbols of pain into proof of survival. And in that moment, Emma Weston was not only free, she was reborn. The applause that followed Emma's tearful release rolled through the ballroom like thunder, leaving Andrew Weston standing in its shadow. For years he had been the center of attention at every gala, the man people craned their necks to see, the name whispered with admiration. But tonight, all eyes avoided him. He was no longer the host of the evening. He was the scandal. Reporters moved closer, their pens poised, cameras flashing relentlessly. "Mr. Weston," one shouted, "what do you say to the allegations of fraud?" Another added, "How do you respond to your wife's claims of betrayal?" Andrew raised his hands, his voice frantic. "This is slander, lies, none of it's true. My wife is emotional, manipulated." But his protests sounded hollow, drowned out by the roar of judgment in the room. Investors who had once toasted him now whispered to one another with grim expressions. A board member finally stepped forward, his tone sharp and unforgiving. "Andrew, as of tonight, I will be calling for an emergency meeting. If these allegations are verified, you'll be removed from Weston Holdings immediately." Andrew's face drained of color. "You can't do that. I built this company." Another voice cut in, colder still. "No, Andrew. You built a house of cards, and tonight it's collapsing." The guests, once eager to court his favor, now stepped back as though he carried a contagion. Even Tessa, his glittering mistress, inched away. She had ridden his coattails for fame and status, but the gleam was gone. The moment she realized he could no longer protect her, she released his arm. I should go," she stammered, her eyes darting to the exits. Then, without a backward glance, she disappeared into the crowd. Andrew's fury exploded. "Cowards, all of you! You wouldn't have half of what you do without me." His voice cracked, echoing against the marble walls. But no one defended him, no one clapped, no one smiled. The security team, discreet until now, stepped closer. One guard leaned in quietly. "Sir, it would be best if you left." Andrew's chest heaved. "I'm not leaving my own gala." But the choice was no longer his. The guests, shifting uncomfortably, began murmuring again. The once loyal allies who had feared his power now looked at him with disgust. He was no longer untouchable. He was radioactive. Emma stood still, watching him unravel. For months she had imagined this moment, not to revel in his downfall, but to witness the truth revealed. Andrew Weston wasn't the titan he pretended to be. He was just a man stripped bare, clutching at shreds of power that no longer existed. The guard's voice grew firmer. "Sir, now." Andrew's shoulders slumped. His eyes darted across the room, searching desperately for someone, anyone, to side with him. But the silence told him everything. He was finished. With a final snarl, he slammed his glass onto the champagne tower, shattering crystal across the floor. Gasps rang out, but no one stopped him. No one cared. He stormed toward the exit, his footsteps heavy, the cameras following his every move. The great Andrew Weston, billionaire, host of the evening, left his own gala not in triumph, but in disgrace. And as the doors slammed behind him, the ballroom exhaled. For the first time all night, the tension broke, replaced by a ripple of relief. Eyes turned back to Emma, not with pity, but with admiration. She hadn't just survived Andrew's betrayal. She had stood against him, watched his empire crumble, and remained standing when he could not. Emma Weston had endured humiliation. Tonight, she had witnessed justice. The grand doors slammed shut behind Andrew Weston, sealing his disgrace outside the ballroom. The silence that followed felt different now, lighter, freer, as though the entire room had exhaled together. The tyrant was gone, and in his absence, something remarkable began to unfold. Emma stood at the center of it all, the chandeliers raining golden light over her midnight blue gown. Her hand lingered over her belly, steadying herself, but for the first time in months, she didn't feel weak, she felt whole. She had endured betrayal, humiliation, and loneliness, yet here she was, standing, unbroken, triumphant. Ethan Blackwell remained at her side, a silent anchor in the chaos. He didn't crowd her, didn't speak for her. He simply stood close enough that she knew she wasn't alone. And that, more than anything, steadied her trembling heart. Then something unexpected happened. A woman in emerald silk, the same board member who had spoken earlier, approached Emma, her expression softened with respect. She reached out, taking Emma's hand gently. My dear, tonight you reminded us what dignity looks like. Don't ever let anyone silence that voice again. Emma blinked back fresh tears, but this time they were not born of sorrow. They were cleansing, healing. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling. One by one, others came forward. A philanthropist praised her courage. An investor apologized for not seeing the truth sooner. Even the reporters, usually vultures circling scandal, approached with surprising gentleness. Mrs. Weston, one asked softly, what do you want the world to know after tonight? Emma inhaled deeply. She had not planned for this moment, but the answer rose naturally. That women are not weak because they carry life, that silence is not the same as invisibility, and that no one deserves to be hidden in shame for someone else's pride. The crowd murmured in agreement, and some applauded again. This time, Emma didn't flinch at the attention. She let it wash over her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Ethan leaned closer, his voice low enough only she could hear. Do you feel it? This is more than survival, Emma. This is healing. She nodded, tears sparkling in her eyes. Healing wasn't instant. It was slow, tender, and painful. But tonight was the first step. Tonight she had taken back her voice, her dignity, her power. Her baby shifted inside her, as though sensing the peace settling over her heart. Emma pressed her hand against her belly and smiled softly. We're going to be okay, she whispered. The orchestra, silent during the confrontation, began to play again. This time the music wasn't background noise. It was a balm, filling the room with warmth. Guests began to dance once more, laughter returning in cautious bursts, but the focus lingered on Emma. Not pity, not scandal. Admiration. Respect. Ethan offered his arm. Shall we? Emma hesitated, then slipped her hand into his. Not as a woman rescued, but as one standing tall, ready to step into a future unshackled from shame. Together, they walked across the ballroom floor, not hidden in the shadows but illuminated in the glow of 100 approving eyes. For the first time in months, Emma Weston felt free. And freedom, she realized, was the most beautiful kind of healing. The days following the gala were a storm of headlines. Newspapers screamed of Andrew Weston's disgrace, of fraud investigations, of his mistress disappearing from the scene. The empire he had built on lies crumbled quickly, each revelation striking harder than the last. But while Andrew fought to salvage scraps of his reputation, Emma Weston was stepping into a new chapter. For the first time in years, she woke in the penthouse without dread. Sunlight streamed through the glass walls, warm against her skin, and she sipped her tea in peace. No photographers hounded her. No whispers of pity haunted her. Instead, messages of support poured in. Letters from women who saw themselves in her, from strangers thanking her for standing tall, from mothers who said, "You gave me courage." Emma didn't reply to all of them, but she read each one with tears of quiet joy. She had thought her story was only pain, but now she understood it had become a beacon. Ethan visited often, never imposing, always steady. Together they discussed plans not for Andrew's downfall, but for Emma's future. One afternoon, he suggested, why not use your voice to create change? You've lived what so many hide. You can give them strength. The idea took root. Within weeks, Emma launched the Unseen No More Foundation, dedicated to supporting women silenced by betrayal, humiliation, or domestic erasure. It offered legal aid, counseling, and career training, practical tools to help them rebuild. Her story had inspired thousands. Now it became a platform to transform lives. The public embraced her. Where Andrew's name had once dominated headlines, now Emma's did, but in a different light. Emma Weston, from forgotten wife to advocate of strength. At the foundation's first charity event, Emma stood before a crowd of supporters, her belly rounder now, the due date drawing near. She spoke not with trembling fear, but with the confidence of a woman reborn. I once thought silence was survival, she told them, but silence is only another cage. Tonight, I stand free, and I promise you, every woman deserves the same. The applause was thunderous, but what mattered most was the peace in her heart. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy daughter with dark curls and lungs strong enough to shake the hospital walls, Emma held her close and whispered, "You will never be hidden. You will never be ashamed. You are proof that strength survives." Tears spilled freely, but they were tears of joy, of catharsis, of a love too fierce to be broken. In the months that followed, Emma built a life that was hers alone. She decorated her daughter's nursery with laughter instead of tears. She filled her days with purpose, surrounded by people who respected her not for her last name, but for her courage. As for Andrew, the last she heard, he was entangled in lawsuits, abandoned by allies, a ghost of the man he once pretended to be. But Emma no longer cared. His downfall was not her victory. Her victory was standing in the light, holding her child, living a life of dignity. One evening, as she watched the city lights flicker outside her window, Ethan stopped by. He looked at her, at the baby in her arms, and smiled. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met, Emma. Don't forget that." She smiled back, tired but content. "I won't. Not anymore." And for the first time in years, Emma Weston's story ended not with betrayal or humiliation, but with peace, justice, and a future brighter than any chandelier. She had walked through fire, and she had emerged unbroken. So our story comes to an end. But my dear friends, if you're still here with me right now, it means something inside this journey touched your heart in its own way. Maybe you've been through silence, betrayal, or moments when you felt invisible. Maybe you've carried burdens no one else could see. And yet, you're still standing. That alone is powerful. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Emma's story shows us exactly that. Pain does not define us, but how we rise after pain does. Marcus Aurelius also wrote, "The obstacle is the way." The very struggles we face can become the path that leads us to healing, strength, and dignity. So let this story be more than drama. Let it be a reminder. You are not weak for breaking down. You are strong because you can stand up again. And if Emma could turn her humiliation into freedom, maybe tonight is the night you remember your own worth too. If this touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's keep walking this journey together. Stronger, wiser, and never unseen again.